They were about to turn off the machines until a quiet nurse saw what no one else did. The machines were still breathing for him when they decided he was already gone. Maggie Reyes stood in the corner of room 7, her back against the cold wall, watching the team prepare to end a life. No one looked at her. No one ever did. 28 years in this hospital, and she had learned to become furniture. Useful, silent, easy to forget. The kind of nurse who noticed everything and said almost nothing. Today, they were moving too fast. She felt it before she understood it. The rhythm was wrong. End-of-life decisions had a weight to them, a gravity that slowed voices, softened footsteps, made people pause before speaking. But this room hummed with efficiency. Clipboards exchanged hands, signatures collected. Dr. Nathan Cross confirmed the time of the procedure with the tone of someone scheduling an oil change. "Family's been notified," someone said. "Consent form signed. We're clear." Clear. The word sat in Maggie's chest like a stone. She looked at the man in the bed. Thomas Brennan, 61 years old, carpenter, widower. 19 days in a coma after a car accident that shouldn't have been fatal. The chart said extensive neurological damage. The chart said irreversible. The chart said no meaningful recovery expected. The chart said he was already dead. His heart just hadn't gotten the message yet. But Maggie had been watching him for 19 days, changing his sheets, adjusting his IV, speaking to him in the early mornings when no one else was around. Not because she believed he could hear, but because silence felt cruel. And something about today didn't fit. Dr. Victoria Ashford entered the room like a cold front. Immaculate white coat, perfect posture. The kind of calm that made you feel small for having emotions. She was the ICU director, and she ran this unit the way generals ran campaigns, with precision, metrics, and an allergy to hesitation.
"We're ahead of schedule," Ashford said, checking her watch. "Let's keep it that way. The board visit is Monday, and I don't want any loose threads." Loose threads. Maggie's stomach turned. The procedure had been scheduled for Thursday, 2 days from now. But this morning, when Maggie arrived for her shift, the whiteboard had already been updated. Brennan, T. Withdrawal of care, 7:15 a.m. No one explained the change. No one thought it needed explaining. Cross approached the bed, his hand hovering over the ventilator controls. He was a good doctor. Maggie had always thought so. Careful, thoughtful. But lately there was something rushed about him, something haunted, like a man trying to outrun his own doubts. "Margaret," Ashford said, noticing her for the first time, "you are not assigned to this room today." "I was covering for Dana. She's running late." "Dana's here now. You can go." It wasn't a suggestion. Maggie nodded, already moving toward the door. She had learned long ago that arguing with Ashford was like arguing with weather. You didn't win. You just got wet. But as she reached the threshold, she stopped. She didn't know why. Later, she would replay this moment 1,000 times, trying to understand what made her turn around. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a movement. It was something smaller, something her body recognized before her mind could name it. She looked at Thomas Brennan. She looked at the monitor beside his bed, and she saw it. It wasn't a spike. It wasn't an alarm. It was nothing that would show up in a report or trigger a code. It was just a hesitation, a flicker in the numbers that didn't match the stillness of the body, like a whisper in a silent room, like a breath held too long. Something doesn't fit. Maggie opened her mouth. The words were right there. "Wait, something's wrong, just wait." But before she could speak, a voice cut through. "Dr. Cross, there's an issue with the consent form."
"The daughter's signature is dated wrong." Cross exhaled, irritated. "How is that possible? Legal cleared it yesterday. Apparently, there's a discrepancy. They need a new form faxed and signed before we can proceed." Ashford's jaw tightened. "How long?" 48 hours minimum. The daughter's in another state. The room shifted. Clipboards lowered. The machine kept breathing. Maggie felt something loosen in her chest. Relief, maybe, or just a pause in the dread. The procedure was delayed, not because of her, not because anyone listened, because of a wrong date on a piece of paper. Bureaucracy had saved Thomas Brennan. For now, the team filed out, already talking about other patients, other cases, other problems. Ashford lingered, her eyes sweeping the room one last time. "We can't carry unresolved cases into next week," she said to no one in particular. "Timing matters more than intention." Then she was gone. Maggie stood alone with Thomas Brennan. The monitor had returned to its steady, meaningless rhythm. Whatever she had seen, or thought she'd seen, was gone now, vanished like smoke. She stared at the screen, willing it to show her again, to prove she wasn't imagining things. Nothing. She moved closer to the bed, looked at his face, the slack jaw, the closed eyes, the body that had been classified, categorized, and scheduled for disposal. Who were you, she thought, before all this, before you became a case number? She didn't expect an answer. She never did. But as she turned to leave, her gaze caught something on the far wall, a small plaque, half hidden behind the supply cabinet. She had passed it 1,000 times without seeing it. Brennan. The name was there, etched in brass, older than the rest of the plaques in this wing, slightly more polished, as if someone still cleaned it. Brennan. The same name as the man in the bed. Maggie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She looked back at Thomas.
At the monitor, at the machines, still breathing for a man the hospital had already decided was dead. Why are they rushing this? She didn't have an answer. Not yet. But she had a feeling. The same feeling she'd had 7 years ago, standing beside her husband's bed, watching the doctors miss what she could see plainly. Something was wrong here, and no one wanted to look. 7 years ago, Maggie Reyes learned what silence costs. She was standing in a room just like this one. Same fluorescent lights, same antiseptic smell, same soft beeping of machines that measured life in numbers. But that room held David, her husband, her best friend, the man who had spent 31 years making her laugh at the worst possible moments. He wasn't laughing then. The doctor said it was a complication, unpredictable, unavoidable. These things happen. But Maggie had seen the medication error, a decimal point in the wrong place, a dosage that didn't match his weight.
She had mentioned it once, quietly, to a nurse she trusted. The nurse had checked and said everything was fine. Everything was not fine. David died on a Tuesday morning, holding her hand, while somewhere down the hall, a committee discussed metrics, and a cafeteria served scrambled eggs. The hospital conducted an internal review, found no wrongdoing, expressed condolences, moved on. Maggie never moved on. She stayed, kept working, kept watching, developed a habit that some colleagues called obsessive and others called paranoid. She noticed things, small things, the flicker of a monitor that didn't match the chart, the pause in a doctor's voice when the words didn't fit the facts, the way systems protected themselves, quietly, automatically, like immune responses against inconvenient truths. She never spoke up again, not loudly, not publicly. She had learned what happened to people who did. Tonight, Maggie couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment in room 7, the monitor, the hesitation in the numbers, the way something had flickered and then vanished, like a thought interrupted. You imagined it, she told herself. You're tired, you're projecting, you're seeing David everywhere. But her body didn't believe her. Her chest felt tight. Her hands wouldn't stop moving, fingers tracing patterns on the blanket, like she was still reading charts in her mind. She thought about Thomas Brennan, 61 years old, carpenter, widower, 19 days in a coma, a man reduced to bullet points on a whiteboard, scheduled for termination like an expired subscription. Who decides when a life stops mattering? At 2:47 a.m., she gave up on sleep, got out of bed, made coffee she didn't drink, sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, and logged into the hospital's remote system. She told herself she just wanted to check, just wanted to confirm that everything was normal.
That the diagnosis was solid, that 3 independent specialists couldn't possibly be wrong. She pulled up Thomas Brennan's file. The chart was thorough, detailed, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a well-run ICU. Admission date, accident report, initial scans showing significant trauma, follow-up assessments documenting declining function, 3 separate neurologists confirming the same conclusion: extensive damage, no meaningful recovery, recommend transition to comfort care. Maggie read every word, every note, every timestamp. And then she found it. A single line, buried in the observation log from 12 days ago. Night shift, 3:22 a.m. A nurse named Patterson had written, "Minimal pupillary response observed during routine check. Patient's left eye appeared to track movement briefly, reported to attending." Below it, a second entry, added the following afternoon. Different handwriting, digital signature. V. Ashford, MD. Previous observation reclassified as artifact.
No clinical significance. Patient status unchanged. Maggie stared at the screen. Artifact, a technical term for noise, meaningless data, the kind of thing you dismissed and forgot. But someone had seen something. Someone else had noticed. And someone had decided it didn't matter. She checked the timestamp on Ashford's note, March 14th, 2 days after the first mention of board efficiency review appeared in the administrative emails. Coincidence, she thought. The word tasted like a lie. Maggie closed the laptop, sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing on the street below. She thought about Patterson, a younger nurse, 3 years on the floor, eager, careful, the kind of person who still believed that documenting things mattered. Patterson had seen something. Patterson had reported it. And Patterson's observation had been reclassified, dismissed, buried under a single word that made it disappear. Artifact. Maggie knew how these things worked. She had watched it happen before, not through conspiracy or malice, but through something quieter, more insidious. The gentle, relentless pressure of a system that rewarded efficiency and punished doubt. The unspoken understanding that some questions were better left unasked. "You're imagining things," she told herself again. "The diagnosis is solid. 3 specialists, independent assessments. You're not a doctor. You don't have the training to question this." But she kept seeing Thomas Brennan's face, the slack jaw, the closed eyes, the body that breathed because a machine told it to. And she kept hearing Ashford's voice. "We can't carry unresolved cases into next week." Unresolved. As if a human life was a paperwork problem, a scheduling conflict, a loose thread to be snipped before Monday's meeting. Maggie made a decision. She wasn't going to accuse anyone, wasn't going to make a scene. She had learned that lesson the hard way. But she was going to look, quietly, carefully, the way she always did. She would check the original scans, compare them to the follow-ups, look for inconsistencies that others might have missed. And if she found nothing, if everything was exactly as the chart said, she would let it go, accept that Thomas Brennan was beyond saving, make peace with another death she couldn't prevent. But if she found something, she didn't let herself finish the thought. The clock on her wall read 4:15 a.m. In 3 hours, she would be back at the hospital, back in the halls where David had died, back in the system that had taught her to stay quiet. She thought about the plaque on the wall in room 7. Brennan, the same name as the patient. Too strange to be coincidence. Too small to mean anything. Or maybe not. Who were you, Thomas, she wondered, before all this, before you became a case number and a problem to solve? She didn't have an answer, but she had 48 hours to find one.
The East Wing of St. Catherine's Hospital was a place most people forgot existed. It had been the original ICU, built in 1987, back when the hospital was smaller and the neighborhood was different. Now it served as overflow storage, old equipment, archived files, the kind of institutional debris that no one wanted to throw away, but no one wanted to see. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a different frequency here. The air smelt like dust and memory. Maggie walked these halls during her lunch break, telling herself she was just stretching her legs, just getting away from the noise of the main floor, just exploring. She was lying to herself, and she knew it. She was looking for something. She just didn't know what yet. The plaque in room 7 had stayed with her all morning. Brennan, a common enough name, probably meaningless, probably just another donor from decades ago, someone with money and a dying relative, buying immortality one brass letter at a time. But the plaque had been cleaner than the others. Someone still polished it. Someone still remembered. And something about that made Maggie's skin prickle. She found the archives on the 3rd floor of the East Wing, a room full of filing cabinets and cardboard boxes, organized by a system that had probably made sense to someone in 1994. The hospital had digitized most records, but the older stuff, donor histories, construction documents, personnel files from before the merger, still lived here, waiting for someone to care. Maggie cared. She started with the donor records. It took her 20 minutes to find the right box, and another 10 to locate the folder. Brennan Family Foundation, 1993-1996. Inside, she found what she expected. Ruth Brennan, Thomas's wife, died of ovarian cancer in 1993 after a 6-month stay at St. Catherine's. The family had donated $200,000 to fund the renovation of the recovery wing, a thank you letter from the hospital administrator. A photo of the dedication ceremony. And there, in the corner of the photo, a younger Thomas Brennan, thin, grief-stricken, standing beside a plaque that read, Brennan Recovery Wing, in loving memory of Ruth Brennan. Maggie studied his face, tried to reconcile this man, upright, present, alive with pain, with the body in room 7, the slack jaw, the closed eyes, the machine breathing for him. What happened to you, she thought. What brought you back here? She kept digging. The construction records told a different story. Thomas Brennan hadn't just donated money, he had built the place. In 1986, before Ruth got sick, Thomas had been part of the crew that constructed the original ICU, a master carpenter, hired to do the finish work, cabinets, doors, the wooden trim that gave the sterile rooms a touch of warmth. He had spent 8 months in this building, shaping it with his hands. The records showed that after Ruth's death, he had returned, not as a worker this time, but as a volunteer. 3 years of regular visits, reading to patients, sitting with families, doing the quiet work that no one else wanted to do. And then, in 2014, he had stopped. No explanation, no farewell letter, just an absence. 1 week he was there, the next he wasn't. The volunteer coordinator had noted, Thomas Brennan, inactive. Reason, personal. Maggie stared at the date. 2014. 10 years ago. What happened in 2014? She didn't know, but she filed the question away, adding it to the growing list of things that didn't quite fit. On her way back to the main building, Maggie passed through the old corridor that connected the East Wing to the central hub. It was rarely used now. Most staff took the Muir route through the cafeteria. But Maggie liked the quiet, the solitude, the feeling of walking through a part of the hospital that time had forgotten. She was halfway down the hall when she saw it. Another plaque,
smaller than the one in room 7.
Mounted on the wall beside an old supply closet, half hidden by a rolling cart someone had abandoned, in appreciation of Thomas Brennan, whose craftsmanship gave these halls their heart, 1986-1987. Maggie stopped, read the words again, whose craftsmanship gave these halls their heart. She touched the brass letters, cool under her fingers, clean, no dust. Someone had been maintaining this plaque too. Someone remembered Thomas Brennan, not as a patient, not as a donor, but as a man who had built something with his hands. "You're not supposed to be down here." Maggie turned. A janitor stood at the end of the corridor. Older man, gray hair, the weathered face of someone who had worked in this building for decades. His name tag said Henry. "Just taking a shortcut," Maggie said. "Didn't mean to wander." Henry studied her for a moment. His eyes flicked to the plaque, then back to her face. "You knew him?" he asked. Maggie hesitated. "No, I just saw his name somewhere. Got curious."
Henry nodded slowly, moved closer, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall. "Tom was a good man," he said. "Did beautiful work. You can still see it in the old wing, the trim, the door frames. They don't build like that anymore." He paused. Shame what happened. Maggie felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" Henry shrugged. "Just that he deserved better, after everything he gave this place." He glanced at the plaque again, something unreadable in his expression. Some people give too much, and then one day they stop coming around, and nobody asks why. He turned and walked away before Maggie could respond. His footsteps faded into silence. The corridor felt colder than before. That night, Maggie sat at her kitchen table again, laptop open, coffee growing cold. She had searched for Thomas Brennan in every database she could access: volunteer records, donor histories, old newspaper clippings digitized by the local library, and she had found almost nothing about 2014.
The year he disappeared from the hospital. The year something changed. Almost nothing, except one small item. A brief mention in the hospital newsletter, archived online. March 2014. A short paragraph about staff restructuring and updated volunteer protocols. A list of names thanked for their service. Thomas Brennan's name was there, buried in the middle, between a retired accountant and a minister's wife. Below the list, a single sentence. The hospital appreciates the many years of dedication these individuals have shown and wishes them well in their future endeavors. Future endeavors. The polite corporate language of dismissal, the verbal equivalent of a door closing softly in your face. Maggie read the sentence 3 times, felt something cold settle in her stomach. Thomas Brennan hadn't stopped coming. He had been pushed out. And now, 10 years later, he was back, lying in a bed he had helped build, surrounded by walls he had shaped with his own hands.
And they were rushing to turn off his machines. Why? The question echoed in her mind. She didn't have an answer, but she knew, with a certainty that lived somewhere deeper than logic, that the answer mattered. The answer might be the only thing keeping Thomas Brennan alive. Jenny Park was the kind of nurse who still believed the system could be fixed. She was 32 years old, 7 years into her career, with a bright-eyed determination of someone who hadn't yet learned to stop hoping. She ran the ICU night shift with a precision that bordered on obsessive, double-checking charts, triple-checking medications, catching the small errors before they became catastrophes. She was also the only person in the hospital who didn't treat Maggie like furniture. They met in the break room at 6 a.m., an hour before the day shift officially began. Jenny was finishing a 12-hour stretch. Maggie was starting one.
The coffee machine between them wheezed and sputtered, producing something that technically qualified as liquid. "You look terrible," Jenny said. "Thanks. Didn't sleep." "Brennan case?" Maggie looked up sharply. "How did you know?" Jenny shrugged. "You've done watching that room for days. I notice things too." She paused, stirring her coffee. Something about it bothering you? Maggie hesitated. She had learned over the years to be careful about who she trusted. Most people didn't want to hear doubts. Most people wanted clean answers and quick resolutions and the comfortable certainty that the system worked. But Jenny was different. Jenny still asked questions. "Can you get me access to the administrative reports?" Maggie asked. "The efficiency metrics, the stuff Ashford sends to the board." Jenny's eyebrows rose. "That's above my clearance." "I know. And probably above yours." "I know that too." Jenny studied her for a long moment.
The break room hummed with the sound of the refrigerator, the distant beeping of monitors down the hall, the muffled voices of night staff heading home. "Why?" Jenny asked. Maggie thought about lying, thought about saying it was nothing, just curiosity, just the restless mind of an insomniac nurse looking for something to do. But she was tired of lying, tired of staying quiet. "Because something's wrong," she said, "and I can't prove it. Not yet, but something about the Brennan case doesn't fit. The timing, the rush, the way everyone's moving like there's a deadline nobody wants to name." Jenny was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive. "I downloaded the quarterly reports last month," she said, "for a presentation I was supposed to give. It got canceled, but I still have the files." She slid the drive across the table. "You didn't get this for me." Maggie took the drive, felt the weight of it in her palm, plastic and metal and something heavier. Trust. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Jenny replied. "You might not like what you find." She didn't like what she found. The quarterly reports were exactly what Ashford had been talking about. Efficiency metrics, performance indicators, the cold mathematics of running a hospital in an era of shrinking budgets and expanding demands. One number jumped out immediately: average length of stay. It was a metric Maggie had heard mentioned in staff meetings, always in the abstract. The idea was simple. The faster patients moved through the system, the more patients the hospital could serve. Shorter stays meant more revenue, better ratings, higher rankings in the industry publications that determined everything from funding to reputation. But length of stay included everyone, even the dying. The reports showed a trend. Over the past 2 years, St. Catherine's had been aggressively reducing its average stay. New protocols, faster discharges, accelerated decisions about end-of-life care. And there, buried in the quarterly summary, a phrase that made Maggie's stomach turn. Recommend prioritizing case resolution in long-term unresponsive patients prior to board review periods. Case resolution. The words were bloodless, clinical, the kind of limelight that made death sound like an administrative task. Maggie checked the dates. The report was from 3 months ago. The next board review was scheduled for Monday, in 4 days. "We can't carry unresolved cases into next week." Ashford's words echoed in her memory. She understood them now, understood the invisible pressure behind them. The system didn't need villains. It just needed metrics, targets, the quiet, relentless logic of efficiency. And Thomas Brennan was a case that had been unresolved for 19 days. Maggie dug deeper. She pulled records of end-of-life cases from the past 18 months, looked for patterns, correlations, anything that might confirm or refute what she was starting to suspect. What she found was subtle, too subtle to prove anything, but too consistent to ignore. In the 2 weeks before each quarterly board review, the number of withdrawal of care decisions increased by roughly 40. The nurse who had seen something in Thomas Brennan's eyes 12 days ago, the observation that had been reclassified as artifact 2 days after the efficiency report mentioned the upcoming board review. She saw something, and someone decided it was inconvenient. Maggie found Dr. Cross in the hallway outside the cafeteria, between patients stealing 5 minutes to eat a protein bar. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, the particular gray pallor of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Dr. Cross," she said, "do you have a minute?" He looked up. Recognition flickered in his eyes, the kind of recognition that came with 28 years of passing someone in hallways. He knew her face, even if he'd never learned her name. "Of course," he said. "Margaret, right?" "Maggie." "Maggie.
What can I do for you? She had rehearsed this moment in her head, planned exactly what to say, but standing here, looking at his tired face, the words felt inadequate.
It's about Thomas Brennan, she said. Something shifted in Cross's expression, a flicker of something. Discomfort? Guilt? She couldn't tell. The Brennan case is proceeding according to protocol, he said. His voice was careful, measured. 3 independent specialists have confirmed the diagnosis. The family has consented. There's no ambiguity here. I'm not questioning the diagnosis, Maggie said. I'm questioning the timing. Cross was quiet for a moment. His jaw tightened. The timing is appropriate, he said. There's no medical reason to delay. But there was a delay, Maggie pressed. The procedure was scheduled for Thursday, it got moved up to Wednesday, and no one explained why. Cross looked away. His hand crushed the protein bar wrapper into a tight ball. Administrative considerations, he said finally. Beyond my control. Beyond your control, Maggie repeated, or beyond your willingness to question. The words hung in the air between them, harsh, unfair maybe.
But true Cross met her eyes. For a moment, she saw something behind the exhaustion, something that looked like doubt, like fear. You're a good nurse, Maggie, he said quietly. I've watched you work for years. You're careful, observant. You notice things other people miss. He paused. But there are things you don't understand about how this place works, pressures you don't see, decisions that get made far above either of our heads. Then help me understand, Maggie said. Cross shook his head slowly. I can't do that. He turned and walked away. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing fainter. He didn't look back. But Maggie had seen his face, had seen the doubt flickering behind his eyes. He knew something was wrong too. He was just too tired or too scared to say it. That night, Maggie stayed late. Long after her shift ended, she sat in the empty break room, staring at the USB drive in her hand. She had evidence now.
Not proof. Nothing that would hold up in a review or convince a committee. But evidence, patterns, correlations, the quiet mathematics of a system that had learned to value efficiency over humanity. And she had a choice. She could walk away, let Thomas Brennan die on schedule, accept that some battles couldn't be won, go home, sleep, forget. Or she could keep looking, keep asking questions nobody wanted to answer, risk everything she had built in 28 years for a man she had never met, a patient who might already be beyond saving. She thought about David, about the words she hadn't said, the questions she hadn't asked, the silence that had cost her everything. She thought about the plaque in the old corridor, Thomas Brennan, whose craftsmanship gave these halls their heart. And she thought about what Jenny had said that morning. You might not like what you find. She was right. Maggie didn't like it, but she couldn't stop now. Somewhere in this hospital, there was an answer.
A reason for the rush. A truth that someone was working very hard to bury. And Maggie was going to find it, even if it destroyed her. 2,000 miles away, Elena Brennan Morris was trying to forget. She stood at her kitchen sink, washing dishes that were already clean, scrubbing at invisible stains while the afternoon sun painted long shadows across the floor. The house was quiet, too quiet. Her husband, Mark, was at work. The kids were at school. She had the whole day to herself. She hated days like this. Days when there was nothing to do but think. Nothing to distract her from the phone call she had made 3 days ago, the words she had spoken to a stranger in a white coat, the permission she had given to end her father's life. It's the kindest thing, Dr. Ashford had said. He's not suffering now, but prolonging this serves no one. The brain damage is extensive, irreversible. He'll never wake up, Elena. He'll never know you're there. Elena had signed the form electronically, typed her name on a line that meant death. And then she had gone to the grocery store and bought milk and bread and strawberries, because the world kept turning, even when you authorized the end of someone's world. She hadn't cried, not yet,
The tears were stuck somewhere deep inside her, frozen in a place she couldn't reach. Maybe that was fitting. She and her father had always been frozen with each other. The phone rang at 4:17 p.m. Elena dried her hands, expecting a telemarketer, a school nurse, anyone but what she got. "Mrs. Morris, this is Margaret Reyes. I'm a nurse at St. Catherine's Hospital. I'm calling about your father." Elena's heart stopped. "Is he—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Is he dead? Did it happen already? Did I miss it?" "He's still alive," the voice said quickly. "The procedure was delayed. There was an issue with the paperwork." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by confusion. "Then why are you calling?" A pause, long enough to make Elena's skin prickle. "Mrs. Morris, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Okay? Why do you think they're rushing this?" Elena blinked. "What do you mean rushing? They said there was no point in waiting, that he was already gone." "Did they explain why the procedure was moved up 2 days ahead of schedule?" "No, I didn't ask." Another pause. When the nurse spoke again, her voice was softer. Careful. "Mrs. Morris, I've been a nurse for 28 years. I've seen a lot of end-of-life decisions, and something about your father's case feels wrong to me. The timing, the pressure, the way certain questions aren't being asked." Elena gripped the phone tighter. "What are you saying? That they're making a mistake?" "I'm saying I don't know, and that bothers me."
Because in my experience, when people rush decisions about life and death, it's usually because they're afraid of what happens if they slow down. Elena sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Her hands were shaking. "I don't understand," she said. 3 doctors confirmed the diagnosis. They said the damage was irreversible. They said—" "I know what they said." The nurse's voice was patient, not pushing, just present. "But did you know your father helped build that hospital? Did you know he volunteered there for years after your mother died? Did you know his name is on plaques in the old wing?" Elena felt something crack inside her, a wall she had built long ago, brick by brick, to protect herself from a father who couldn't love her the way she needed. "No," she whispered, "I didn't know any of that. He stopped volunteering in 2014, suddenly, no explanation. And now, 10 years later, he's back in that hospital, and they're rushing to turn off his machines before the board meets on Monday." A pause. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything, Mrs. Morris. I'm just asking questions, and I think you should be asking them too." Elena closed her eyes, saw her father's face, not the slack, empty face in the hospital bed she had never visited, but the face from her childhood. The man who built her a treehouse when she was 7. The man who taught her to use a hammer, to measure twice and cut once, to take pride in work done well. The man who had disappeared inside himself when her mother died, who had become a ghost in his own house, who had looked at Elena with eyes full of grief and seen only the wife he had lost. She had spent 20 years being angry at him, 20 years waiting for an apology that never came, 20 years building a life as far away from him as possible. And now she was letting strangers decide when he died.
"What do you want me to do?" Elena asked. "I want you to come here," the nurse said. "I want you to see him. I want you to ask the questions I can't ask. Because I'm just a nurse, Mrs. Morris. Nobody listens to me. But you're his daughter. You have rights. You have a voice. And if you're wrong, if the diagnosis is correct and he really is gone, then at least you'll know. At least you'll have seen him. At least you won't spend the rest of your life wondering." Elena thought about the form she had signed, the line with her typed name, the permission she had given without ever looking her father in the face. She thought about the treehouse, the hammer, the way he used to smell like sawdust and coffee. She thought about all the things she had never said, all the questions she had never asked, all the years she had wasted being angry instead of trying to understand. "I'll be there tomorrow," she said. Thank you, Mrs. Morris. Elena. Call me Elena. She hung up the phone.
Sat in the silent kitchen, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor. For the first time in 3 days, she felt something thaw inside her chest. Not hope exactly, something smaller, something fragile, the beginning of a question she should have asked a long time ago. Who were you, Dad? Who were you really? She was going to find out, even if the answer broke her. The phone call changed everything. Elena booked a flight for 6:15 a.m., packed a bag without thinking about what she was putting in it, told her husband she had to go, couldn't explain why, would call when she landed. Mark didn't ask questions. After 15 years of marriage, he knew when Elena had made up her mind. She didn't sleep that night, lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the nurse's words. Why do you think they're rushing this? A question Elena had never thought to ask. A question that now felt like a splinter under her skin, impossible to ignore. She thought about her father.
Not the ghost he had become after her mother's death, but the man he was before. The carpenter who could build anything. The volunteer who spent his Saturdays reading to strangers in hospital beds. The widower who had poured his grief into giving because he didn't know how to pour it into his daughter. You gave everything to that hospital, Elena thought, and now they're rushing to let you die. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense, unless there was something she didn't know. At St. Catherine's Hospital, Maggie Reyes was running out of time. The phone call to Elena had been a risk, a desperate gamble. If Ashford found out, and she probably would, there would be consequences. Maggie had contacted a patient's family member without authorization, had raised questions about a case that was officially closed, had crossed lines she had spent 28 years carefully avoiding. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to something. She just didn't know what that something was yet. The morning after the call, Maggie arrived at the hospital early. Checked on Thomas Brennan through the window of room 7. She wasn't assigned to him anymore. Couldn't enter without raising suspicion. He looked the same. The machines breathed for him. The monitors traced their steady lines. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had changed. Because somewhere in this building, someone knew why Thomas Brennan was being rushed toward death. Someone had made a decision that they didn't want examined, and Maggie was getting closer to finding out who. The answer came from an unexpected place. Henry, the janitor from the East Wing, found her in the break room during lunch. He moved like a man who had learned to be invisible, quietly, efficiently, leaving no trace. "You're still asking about Tom Brennan," he said, not a question. Maggie looked up. "You know something." Henry sat down across from her.
His face was weathered, lined with decades of work in a building that most people took for granted. He had been cleaning these halls since before Maggie started, since before the merger, since before St. Catherine's became what it was now. "I know a lot of things," he said. "Most of them I keep to myself. That's how you survive in a place like this. But Tom was good to me. Back when nobody else was. Back when I was just another janitor nobody noticed." He paused. He noticed, asked my name, remembered my birthday, brought me coffee when I was working late. A sad smile crossed his face. He was the kind of man who saw people, really saw them. Maggie felt something tighten in her chest. What happened in 2014? Why did he stop coming? Henry was quiet for a long moment. His hands, rough and calloused, folded together on the table. "There was an incident," he said finally. "Something Tom saw, something he wasn't supposed to see." "What kind of incident?"
I don't know the details, but I know it involved the administration, the board, money, maybe, or mistakes.
The kind of things hospitals bury because they're too expensive to admit. He shook his head. Tom tried to report it, went through the proper channels, wrote letters, made calls, and then one day they told him his volunteer services were no longer needed. Maggie's heart was pounding. They pushed him out. They erased him, Henry said, quietly, politely, the way this place erases anything inconvenient. He met her eyes, and now he's back, and they're in a hurry to make him disappear again. Maggie spent the rest of the day searching. She looked for records of the 2014 incident, complaints filed, internal reviews, anything that might explain what Thomas Brennan had seen, what he had reported, what had gotten him pushed out. She found nothing. The records from that period were sparse, gaps in the archives, files that should have existed but didn't.
Someone had cleaned house. Someone had made sure there was nothing to find. But absence was also evidence. The holes in the record told a story of their own. They're afraid of him, Maggie realized. Not of what he might say. He can't say anything. They're afraid of what he represents, what his presence reminds them of. Thomas Brennan was a witness, a living reminder of something the hospital wanted to forget. And as long as he was alive, that memory lived too. At 4:47 p.m., Maggie was called to Dr. Ashford's office. The summons came through the floor supervisor, polite, professional, impossible to refuse. Maggie walked the long hallway to the administrative wing with her heart pounding, her palms damp, her mind racing through everything she had done, every line she had crossed. Ashford's office was pristine, white walls, glass desk, the kind of minimalist perfection that made you feel like a smudge just by existing. "Sit down, Margaret," Ashford said. Maggie sat.
Ashford studied her for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable, not angry, not concerned, just watchful, the way a predator watches prey. "You called Elena Morris," Ashford said, not a question. Maggie didn't flinch. Yes. Without authorization, without consulting the care team, without any medical justification. "I had concerns about the case." Concerns. Ashford repeated the word like it was something distasteful. What concerns exactly? Maggie met her eyes, held them. The timing of the procedure, the reclassification of the pupillary response, the fact that Thomas Brennan's name appears on plaques throughout this hospital, but nobody seems to want to talk about who he was or why he stopped volunteering. Ashford was very still. For a moment, something flickered behind her calm facade. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "You've been busy," Ashford said softly. "I've been paying attention." Ashford leaned back in her chair, folded her hands.
When she spoke again, her voice was almost gentle. "Margaret, I understand the impulse. I really do. You've been here a long time. You care about patients. You want to believe that every life can be saved, every story can have a happy ending." She paused. "But that's not how medicine works. Sometimes people die. Sometimes there's nothing we can do. And sometimes the kindest thing, the most humane thing, is to let go. And sometimes," Maggie said, "the system decides when to let go, based on metrics and board meetings, not medical necessity." Silence. Ashford's eyes hardened, just for a moment, just long enough for Maggie to see the steel beneath the polish. "You're being transferred," Ashford said, "effective immediately. Post-surgical recovery. You'll report there tomorrow morning. And Thomas Brennan? Thomas Brennan is not your concern anymore." Maggie stood, walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. "His daughter is coming," she said. "Tomorrow."
"She has questions." She didn't wait for a response. She walked out, closing the door softly behind her. But she had seen Ashford's face, the flicker of something that looked almost like fear. Good, Maggie thought. Let them be afraid. Elena's flight landed at 11:47 a.m. She hadn't slept on the plane, couldn't close her eyes without seeing her father's face. The young face from old photographs, the grieving face from her mother's funeral, the absent face that had haunted her childhood. So many versions of the same man, none of them complete. She rented a car, drove to the hospital with her hands tight on the wheel, her heart pounding a rhythm she didn't recognize. Fear, anticipation, something that might have been hope if she had let herself name it. St. Catherine's Hospital rose against the gray sky like a monument to efficiency. Glass and steel, clean lines, the kind of building that processed people by the thousands and called it care. Elena parked, sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the entrance. "You can still turn around," a voice whispered. "Go home. Let them do what they're going to do. You signed the papers. You made your peace. This isn't your fight anymore." But another voice, quieter, older, answered back. "He's your father. You owe him at least this much." She got out of the car and walked toward the doors. Dr. Victoria Ashford intercepted her before she reached the ICU. "Mrs. Morris?" Ashford appeared from a side corridor, impeccably dressed, her smile precise and practiced. "I'm so glad you came. I know this must be difficult." Elena studied the woman in front of her, polished, professional, the kind of person who had learned to make hard decisions without flinching. "I want to see my father," Elena said. "Of course, but first, perhaps we could talk. There are some things I'd like to explain." Elena hesitated. The nurse, Maggie, had warned her about this. "They'll try to manage you, control the conversation, make you feel like asking questions is unreasonable." "I'd prefer to see him first," Elena said. "Then we can talk." Something flickered in Ashford's eyes, displeasure, quickly masked. "Of course," she said again. "I'll have someone take you." Room 7 was smaller than Elena expected. She stood in the doorway, unable to move, staring at the figure in the bed. The man who had taught her to ride a bike. The man who had stopped talking after her mother died. The man she had loved and hated and missed and resented for 34 years. He looked like a stranger. The machines breathed for him. Tubes snaked from his arms, his chest, his throat. His face was slack, empty, a mask of what he used to be. His hands, the hands that had built her treehouse, that had shaped wood into beauty, lay motionless on the white sheets. Elena moved closer, sat in the chair beside the bed, reached out and took his hand. Cold, still, but present. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm here." Nothing. No response. No flicker of recognition. She sat there for a long time, holding his hand, watching his chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The room smelled like antiseptic, and something else, something faint and sad, the smell of a body giving up. "He's already gone," she thought. The nurse was wrong. This is just a shell. But she didn't let go of his hand. Ashford found her an hour later. "Mrs. Morris." The doctor's voice was gentle, practiced. "I know this is hard, but we need to discuss the next steps." Elena looked up. Her eyes were dry. The tears still wouldn't come. "The procedure was scheduled for this morning," Ashford continued. "Your call last night delayed it, but I want you to understand, delaying isn't the same as changing. The diagnosis is clear. 3 independent specialists have confirmed it. Your father is not going to wake up." "How do you know?" "Excuse me? How do you know he's not going to wake up? How can you be certain?" Ashford's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. A small tightening, a subtle closing. "The tests are definitive, Mrs. Morris. Brain death isn't a spectrum. It's a binary. He's either there or he's not, and he's not." "But he's not brain dead," Elena said slowly. "That's not what the paperwork says. It says extensive neurological damage and no meaningful recovery expected. That's not the thing. Ashford blinked. Just once. A tiny crack in the facade. The outcome is the same, she said. The distinction is technical. The distinction is whether my father might still be in there. Elena's voice was steady now, stronger. The distinction is whether you're turning off machines on a dead man or killing someone who's still alive. Silence. Ashford recovered quickly. Her smile returned, smooth and professional. I understand your concerns, truly. But I've been doing this for 20 years, Mrs. Morris. I've seen families struggle with these decisions.
The mind looks for hope where there is none. It's human nature. Is it also human nature to rush these decisions before board meetings? The words hung in the air. Elena watched Ashford's face closely, looking for a reaction, a flinch, a tell. Nothing. The woman was marble. I don't know what you've been told, Ashford said quietly, but I assure you, timing has nothing to do with this decision. We're trying to spare your father unnecessary suffering. We're trying to spare you unnecessary suffering. Then give me more time. Mrs. Morris. 48 hours. Elena stood up, met Ashford's eyes. That's all I'm asking. 48 hours to say goodbye, to sit with him, to be sure. Ashford was silent for a long moment. The machines beeped. The ventilator hissed. 48 hours, she said finally. But after that, Mrs. Morris, we need to make a decision, for everyone's sake. She turned and left. Her heels clicked against the floor, growing fainter, disappearing into the hum of the hospital. Elena sat back down, took her father's hand again. 48 hours, she thought. That's all I have. She looked at his face, the slack jaw, the closed eyes, the body that had been declared beyond hope. And she made a decision of her own. She wasn't going to give up. Not yet. Not until she knew, really knew, that there was nothing left to save. I'm here, Dad, she thought. I'm not going anywhere. Somewhere deep in the darkness, in the silent prison of his own body, Thomas Brennan heard a voice. Familiar, distant, like a light at the bottom of a well. He tried to reach for it, and for the first time in 19 days, something flickered. The transfer was immediate. Maggie arrived for her shift the next morning and found her locker already cleared, her badge reprogrammed.
Her name removed from the ICU schedule and reassigned to post-surgical recovery, a quieter wing, slower pace, far from room 7, and the man whose machines were still breathing. Nobody explained. Nobody needed to. She understood the message perfectly. Stop asking questions. The post-surgical wing was on the 3rd floor east side, close to the old archives, close to the forgotten corridors where Thomas Brennan's plaques still hung. A coincidence, maybe, or a reminder of what happened to people who dug too deep. Maggie worked her shift in silence, changed bandages, checked vitals, smiled at patients who were healing, going home, returning to lives that would continue without interruption. Normal work, safe work, the kind of work that didn't threaten anyone. But her mind was elsewhere. Elena's here, she thought. She's asking questions. She bought us time. 48 hours. That's what the floor supervisor had mentioned in passing. Ashford had granted the daughter a delay.
2 more days before the procedure. 2 more days before Thomas Brennan became a closed case. It wasn't enough, but it was something. During her lunch break, Maggie found Jenny in the stairwell. They had developed a system over the past few days. Brief meetings in places without cameras, conversations that could be denied if necessary, the kind of careful communication that happened when you worked inside a system that punished dissent. They flagged the case, Jenny said quietly. I saw it in the system this morning. Thomas Brennan's file has been marked administrative review pending. That's new. What does that mean? It means someone's nervous. They're documenting everything now, covering their tracks. Jenny's face was pale. Maggie, I also found something else. The case status was changed to resolved 2 days ago, before the procedure was supposed to happen, before the paperwork delay. Maggie felt cold. They marked him as dead before he died. Not officially dead.
Just closed. Like the decision had already been made and they were just waiting for the formality. Jenny shook her head. I've never seen that before. Cases don't get closed until after the procedure. This is backwards. Maggie leaned against the wall. The stairwell was cold, gray, echoing with the distant sounds of footsteps from floors above and below. Someone decided before they confirmed, she thought. Someone wanted this done quickly, quietly. There's something else, Jenny said. The neurological test, the one that's supposed to confirm the diagnosis before withdrawal of care, it's still listed as pending. They were going to turn off his machines without the final confirmation. That's against protocol. I know. Jenny's voice was barely a whisper. Maggie, what do we do? Maggie closed her eyes, thought about David, about the medication error that killed him, about the internal review that found nothing wrong, about the way systems protected themselves, automatically, instinctively, without anyone having to give orders. We find proof, she said, something they can't bury, something that forces them to look. How? Maggie opened her eyes. Elena, the daughter, she has rights we don't have. She can demand tests, request records, make them follow their own protocols. And if they refuse, then we'll know exactly what they're hiding. That night, Maggie broke protocol again. She wasn't supposed to contact patients' families, wasn't supposed to interfere with cases outside her assigned unit, wasn't supposed to do anything that might embarrass the hospital or question the judgment of her superiors. She had spent 28 years following those rules, 28 years of silence and compliance, and watching things she couldn't change. Not anymore. She found Elena in the hospital cafeteria at 7 p.m., sitting alone at a corner table, staring at a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The younger woman looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, shoulders hunched, the posture of someone carrying too much weight. Mrs. Morris, Maggie said quietly, sliding into the seat across from her. Elena. Elena looked up. Recognition flickered in her eyes. You're the nurse, the one who called me. Yes. They said you were transferred, that I shouldn't talk to you. They're right. You shouldn't. Maggie paused. But I have information you need to hear. Elena studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, the wariness giving way to something harder, more determined. Tell me, she said. Maggie told her everything. The efficiency metrics, the pattern of accelerated decisions before board reviews, the pupillary response that had been reclassified as artifact, the case file marked resolved before the procedure, the neurological test that was still pending. Elena listened without interrupting. Her face grew paler with each revelation, but her eyes stayed focused, sharp. They were going to kill him without the final test, Elena said slowly, without confirming the diagnosis. Yes. That's malpractice. It's a gray area. Maggie's voice was bitter. The diagnosis was already confirmed by 3 specialists. The final test is recommended, but not required in cases where the outcome is considered certain. They would have argued they were following protocol. Technically. Elena repeated the word like a curse. That's how it works here. Everything is technically correct. Every decision is defensible. Every shortcut has a justification. Maggie leaned forward. But you can change that. You're his next of kin. You have the right to demand the final test before any procedure. You have the right to see every document, every record, every note in his file. They can't refuse you. And if the test confirms what they're saying? If there's really nothing left? Maggie was quiet for a moment. Then at least you'll know. And at least they'll have to follow their own rules to get there. Elena picked up her coffee cup, set it down again. Her hands were trembling slightly. Why are you doing this? She asked. You're risking everything. Your job, your career,
For a man you never met. Maggie thought about David, about the silence that had killed him, about the weight she had carried for 7 years. Because I met him, she said quietly, just not in time. Elena didn't ask what she meant. Maybe she understood. Maybe grief recognized grief. Tell me what to do, Elena said. Tomorrow morning, you go to Ashford's office. You demand the final neurological assessment before any procedure. You put it in writing. You make them document their response. And if they refuse, they won't refuse. Maggie's voice was certain. They can't. Not with a paper trail.
Not with a family member demanding compliance with their own protocols. Elena nodded slowly, her jaw tightened. Something in her eyes hardened into resolve. Okay, she said. Tomorrow morning. Maggie stood, paused. One more thing, she said. When you see him tonight, talk to him. Even if you think he can't hear, even if it feels pointless. She hesitated. Sometimes people find their way back when they have something to come back to. She left before Elena could respond, walked through the empty hallways, past the closed doors and humming machines, past the patients sleeping and the nurses checking charts, and the endless quiet business of a hospital at night. 48 hours, she thought. That's all we have. She hoped it would be enough. Dr. Nathan Cross couldn't sleep. It was 2 a.m., and he was sitting in his office, staring at Thomas Brennan's file on his computer screen. The same file he had reviewed a dozen times. The same diagnosis he had confirmed.
The same conclusion he had accepted without question. Until now. Why are they rushing this? The nurse's question haunted him. Margaret Reyes, quiet, careful, invisible. The kind of nurse he had worked alongside for years without really seeing. She had asked him a simple question, and he had dismissed her, explained away her concerns with protocols and procedures and the comfortable certainty of medical consensus. But she had seen something he hadn't. Or maybe she had seen something he had chosen not to look at. Cross rubbed his eyes, pulled up the original scans, studied the images of Thomas Brennan's brain, the dark areas indicating damage, the patterns that 3 specialists had interpreted as irreversible. Irreversible. The word felt different now, heavier, less certain. He thought about the case from 3 years ago. Michael Torres, 27 years old, car accident, traumatic brain injury. Cross had waited too long to make a decision, kept hoping for improvement.
Kept running tests, and while he waited, Michael developed a secondary infection that his weakened system couldn't fight. Michael died because Cross hesitated. After that, Cross had made a promise to himself. When the evidence was clear, act quickly. The phone call came at 3:17 a.m. It was the ICU night nurse, Patterson, the one who had noted the pupillary response 12 days ago, the observation that had been reclassified as artifact. Dr. Cross, I'm sorry to wake you, but something happened. Cross was already reaching for his coat. What is it? The Brennan patient. His daughter was visiting late. We let her stay past hours. She was talking to him, holding his hand, and she said she felt something. A squeeze. Very faint, but a squeeze? She's insisting it was intentional, not a reflex. She wants someone to check him. Cross closed his eyes, felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. A squeeze. Probably nothing. Probably involuntary muscle movement, common in comatose patients, documented hundreds of times. The kind of thing families misinterpreted because they need it to believe. But Patterson had seen something 12 days ago, and that observation had been buried. I'm on my way, Cross said. The hospital at 4 a.m. was a different place, quiet, empty. The hallways echoed with footsteps that seemed too loud. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a frequency that felt almost alive. Cross walked through the ICU like a man moving through a dream, his mind churning with possibilities he didn't want to consider. Elena was still in room 7, sitting beside her father's bed. She looked up when Cross entered, eyes red from crying, but alert, focused. "He squeezed my hand," she said. "I know what you're going to say. Reflexes, involuntary movement. I've read about it. But this was different." "Different how?"
I was telling him about my daughter, his granddaughter. He's never met her. Her voice cracked. I said her name, Sophie, and his fingers tightened, just for a second, like he was trying to hold on. Cross moved to the bed, looked at Thomas Brennan's face. The same slack features, the same closed eyes, the same body that had been declared beyond recovery. But something felt different now. Something in the room had shifted. He pulled out his penlight, lifted Thomas's eyelid, shone the light across the pupil. Nothing. He tried again, slower this time, watching carefully. And then he saw it. A contraction, minimal, almost imperceptible, but present. Cross stepped back. His heart was pounding. "What is it?" Elena asked. "What did you see?" Cross didn't answer immediately. He was running through differential diagnoses in his head. Locked-in syndrome, minimally conscious state, the rare conditions that mimicked brain death but weren't. The cases that slipped through the cracks because nobody looked closely enough. "I need to run more tests," he said finally. "What does that mean? Is he—" "I don't know yet." Cross met her eyes, "but I'm going to find out." He ordered the tests at 5:30 a.m., an EEG to measure brain activity, an fMRI to assess consciousness, the kind of comprehensive assessment that should have been done before any end-of-life decision, the kind of assessment that had been skipped because the diagnosis seemed certain. At 6:15 a.m., his phone rang. Dr. Ashford. "Nathan?" Her voice was cold, controlled. "I understand you've ordered additional testing on the Brennan case." "Yes." The case was already resolved. 3 specialists confirmed the diagnosis. The family had consented. The daughter revoked consent. She has concerns. I share them. Silence on the line. When Ashford spoke again, her voice was softer, more dangerous. "Nathan, I need you to think carefully about what you're doing."
This hospital runs on protocols, on trust, on the understanding that we don't second-guess each other without cause. There is cause. What cause? A daughter who can't let go? A nurse who's been watching too many medical dramas? A pause. I've seen your record, Nathan. I know about Michael Torres. I know you're still carrying that guilt. But you can't let one mistake turn you into someone who questions everything. Cross felt the words like a blade, precise, targeted. Ashford knew exactly where to cut. "This isn't about Torres," he said quietly. "Isn't it?" He didn't answer. "Run your tests," Ashford said finally. "But understand this. If the results confirm what we already know, this conversation will be documented, and your judgment will be questioned, formally." She hung up. Cross stood in the empty hallway, phone in hand, listening to the silence. She's afraid, he realized, not of being wrong, of being exposed. The thought crystallized something inside him. For 3 years, he had been running from one mistake, trying to atone by being decisive, certain, efficient. But certainty could be its own kind of blindness. Maybe doubt wasn't weakness. Maybe doubt was the only thing that kept you honest. At 9 a.m., Thomas Brennan was wheeled into the imaging center. Cross stood at the console, watching the screens, waiting for the machine to show him something, anything that would justify his doubt. The technician adjusted the settings. The magnets hummed. The images began to form. And Cross saw it. Not damage, not absence, activity, very deep in the temporal lobe, flickering like a candle in a dark room, faint but unmistakable. Thomas Brennan was still in there, and they had almost turned off his machines. Elena was waiting in the hallway when Cross emerged from the imaging center. She had been pacing for 2 hours, wearing a path in the linoleum, refusing coffee, refusing food, refusing to sit down.
Every time someone walked past, she looked up with eyes full of desperate hope. When she saw Cross's face, she stopped breathing. "Tell me," she said. Cross looked at her for a long moment. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the same exhaustion she had seen in her own reflection that morning. But there was something else there now, something that looked almost like wonder. "There's activity," he said, "significant activity in areas associated with consciousness and memory. It's not what we expected." Elena felt her knees go weak. She reached for the wall, steadied herself. "What does that mean? Is he aware?" "It's called a minimally conscious state. It's different from a vegetative state, different from what we diagnosed. Patients in this condition can have periods of awareness. They can sometimes respond to stimuli. They can hear, feel, understand, even if they can't respond in ways we recognize." Elena's hand went to her mouth. The tears she had been holding back for days finally broke through. "He heard me," she whispered. "When I talked to him, when I said Sophie's name, he heard me. It's possible, yes. And you were going to turn off his machines? You were going to kill him." The words hung in the air. Cross flinched, but he didn't look away. "We were wrong," he said quietly. "I was wrong." Elena went back to room 7. She sat beside her father's bed and cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears of grief, but the raw, shaking sobs of someone who had almost lost everything and hadn't known it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, holding his hand. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I almost let them. I almost said yes and walked away and let them." She couldn't finish. Thomas lay motionless, as he had for 19 days. The machines breathed for him. The monitors traced their steady lines. Nothing had visibly changed. But everything had changed. He was still there, trapped inside his own body, listening to every word, feeling every touch, waiting for someone to see him. And she had almost let him die. Maggie found out through Jenny. She was in the post-surgical wing, checking on a patient recovering from a hip replacement, when her phone buzzed with a text. Test showed activity. He's conscious. They're reassessing everything. Maggie read the message 3 times, let the words sink in. He's conscious. Thomas Brennan was alive. Not just technically alive, kept breathing by machines. Actually alive, aware, present. And they had almost killed him. She excused herself, found an empty supply closet, leaned against the shelves full of gauze and syringes, and closed her eyes. For 7 years, she had carried the weight of David's death, the silence that had killed him, the questions she hadn't asked, the fight she hadn't fought. This time, she had fought. This time, she had spoken up. And this time, someone had listened. It didn't bring David back. Nothing could do that. But for the first time in 7 years, the weight felt a little lighter. The news spread through the hospital like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew. The Brennan case, the one that had been scheduled for termination, the one that had been marked resolved in the system, was alive, conscious, misdiagnosed. Reactions varied. Some nurses were shocked. Others were quietly vindicated. They had seen cases like this before. Patients who had been written off too quickly. Families who had been pressured to let go. The administration was in crisis mode. Emergency meetings behind closed doors. Lawyers consulted. Statements drafted and revised and drafted again. And at the center of it all, Dr. Victoria Ashford sat in her office, staring at the wall, her face unreadable. Cross found her there at 3 p.m. He knocked once, then entered without waiting for her response. He was too tired for protocol, too tired for politics. "The tests are conclusive," he said.
Thomas Brennan shows significant brain activity consistent with a minimally conscious state. The original diagnosis was wrong. Ashford didn't look at him. The original diagnosis was consistent with available evidence. The evidence we chose to look at. Now she turned, her eyes were cold. Be careful, Nathan. Very careful about the accusations you're making. I'm not making accusations. I'm stating facts. The pupillary response that Patterson noted 12 days ago was real. It was documented and then reclassified as artifact by you. If that response had been taken seriously, the diagnosis might have been caught weeks ago. Ashford was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost gentle. And what would have changed exactly? The prognosis is still poor. Recovery is unlikely. We would have spent hospital resources, significant resources, on a case with minimal chance of meaningful outcome. He's a human being, not a resource allocation problem.
Everything is a resource allocation problem, Nathan. Every bed, every machine, every hour of nursing care. We don't have infinite capacity. We have to make choices. We made the wrong choice. We made a defensible choice. Ashford stood, walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot below. The specialists agreed. The family consented. The protocols were followed. If this case is reviewed, and it will be reviewed, we will be found to have acted within acceptable medical standards. Cross stared at her. Is that really all you care about? Being defensible? Ashford turned back. For a moment, something flickered behind her mask. Exhaustion, maybe, or something sadder. I care about running a hospital that can continue to save lives, Nathan. That means making hard decisions. That means not letting every borderline case consume resources that could save someone else. That means accepting that we can't save everyone, and that trying to do so has costs. She paused.
I am sorry about Thomas Brennan, truly, but I am not sorry for the system that made the decision, because that system saves more lives than it loses. And if we start second-guessing every call, if we let doubt paralyze us, the whole thing falls apart. Cross shook his head slowly. The system didn't make the decision, Victoria. You did. We all did. And we were wrong. He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the handle. I'm recommending a full review of our end-of-life protocols, mandatory secondary assessments before any withdrawal of care, extended observation periods for ambiguous cases. That will slow everything down, increase costs, create bottlenecks. Good, Cross said. Maybe we need to slow down. He left the door open behind him. That night, Elena stayed with her father until visiting hours ended. She talked to him about everything, about her childhood, about her mother, about the years of silence between them, about Sophie, the granddaughter he had never met,
About forgiveness. About second chances. Thomas didn't respond. Not visibly. Not in any way she could measure or document. But she felt him listening. She felt him there, behind the stillness, reaching toward her voice, like a man drowning reaching for light. I'm not going anywhere, she told him. Not this time. We're going to figure this out. Together. She squeezed his hand. And in the darkness of his own mind, Thomas Brennan held on. The news of Thomas Brennan's misdiagnosis reached the board within hours. Dr. Victoria Ashford spent the afternoon in back-to-back calls with hospital administrators, legal counsel, and the chief medical officer. Her door stayed closed. Her assistant turned away visitors. The fluorescent light in her office burned late into the evening. By the next morning, the official response had been crafted. A statement was prepared, not for the public, not yet, but for internal distribution. The language was careful, clinical, the kind of words that acknowledged nothing while appearing to address everything. Following routine reassessment, the care team has identified additional neurological activity in the patient Thomas Brennan. Treatment protocols are being adjusted accordingly. The hospital remains committed to the highest standards of patient care. No mention of the rush timeline, no mention of the reclassified observation, no mention of the case being marked resolved before the final test.
The system was protecting itself, and Maggie knew that protection came at a cost. She found Cross in the stairwell during the shift change. He looked worse than the last time she had seen him. Unshaven, dark circles carved deep under his eyes, the hollow expression of someone who hadn't slept in days. But there was something else there now, something that looked like determination. "They're going to bury it," Maggie said without preamble. "The statement says nothing. No accountability. No changes." "I know."
Cross leaned against the railing, staring at the concrete steps. "I've already submitted my recommendation for protocol changes. Mandatory secondary assessments, extended observation periods, real oversight." And Ashford rejected it, said it would create operational bottlenecks. He laughed bitterly. Operational bottlenecks. That's what we're calling human lives now. Maggie was quiet for a moment. There might be another way. Cross looked up. "What do you mean?" "The other cases, the ones I found in the records. If Thomas wasn't the only one, if there's a pattern, they can't bury that, not if it goes beyond one mistake." "You're talking about an investigation." "I'm talking about the truth." Cross was silent for a long moment. The stairwell echoed with distant sounds, footsteps, doors, the constant hum of a building that never stopped moving. "If I push for this, they'll come after me," he said finally. Ashford made that clear. "My judgment will be questioned. Formally."
My career could be over. I know. And you've already been transferred. If they find out you're still involved, I know that too. Cross studied her face. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. "Okay," he said, "let's find the truth." The investigation started quietly. Cross used his access to pull records from the past 2 years, every end-of-life case in the ICU, every withdrawal of care, every patient who had been classified as irreversible and disconnected from life support. Maggie helped where she could, working around her new schedule, stealing moments between shifts to cross-reference dates and look for patterns. What they found was subtle. Nothing that would stand up in court, nothing that would make headlines, but the pattern was there. 17 cases in 24 months, where withdrawal of care had been accelerated in the 2 weeks before a board review. 12 cases where observations had been reclassified or dismissed.
8 cases where the final confirmatory tests had been delayed or skipped entirely. Not all of them were wrong. Probably most of them were legitimate decisions, made in good faith, following reasonable medical judgment. But some of them might not have been, and there was no way to know which ones, because the patients were dead, and the records had been sanitized, and the families had moved on. "This is circumstantial," Cross said, staring at the spreadsheet Maggie had compiled. "It's not proof. It's a pattern. Patterns matter. Not to lawyers, not to administrators. They'll say it's coincidence. They'll say we're seeing what we want to see." Maggie thought about David, about the internal review that had found nothing wrong, about the way systems protected themselves by making everything look normal. "Then we need something they can't dismiss," she said. "We need someone to go on record." Elena was the one who found it. She had been going through her father's things, the belongings that had been collected from his house after the accident, stored in boxes that nobody had bothered to open. Old photographs, tax documents, the accumulated debris of 61 years of life. And in the bottom of one box, a folder. The folder contained copies of letters, dozens of them, all addressed to the hospital administration, all dated 2014. The letters described what Thomas Brennan had witnessed during his years as a volunteer: patients whose care had been rushed, families who had been pressured, decisions that had been made too quickly, with too little oversight. Thomas had tried to report it, through proper channels, in writing, with documentation, and he had been silenced. The final letter was dated March 2014, the same month he had stopped volunteering. It was addressed to the hospital's ethics committee,
It asked for a formal investigation into end-of-life protocols. There was no response attached.
No acknowledgement. No evidence that anyone had ever read it. But there was a notation at the bottom, in Thomas's handwriting. Meeting with V. Ashford scheduled. Will present findings directly. V. Ashford. Victoria Ashford. Thomas Brennan had confronted her 10 years ago, and then he had disappeared from the hospital's records. And now he was back, lying in a bed in the ICU he had helped build, and Ashford had been rushing to turn off his machines. Not coincidence, Maggie thought when Elena showed her the letters. Connection. The meeting happened in Cross's office, after hours. Elena spread the letters across the desk. Cross read them one by one, his face growing paler with each page. Maggie stood by the window, watching the darkness outside, waiting for him to finish. He knew, Cross said finally. 10 years ago, he saw exactly what we are seeing now, and he tried to stop it. And they shut him up, Elena said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling.
They pushed him out and buried his concerns and waited for everyone to forget. But they didn't forget. Maggie turned from the window. Ashford didn't forget. That's why she was so eager to resolve his case quickly, not because of efficiency metrics, because of history. We can't prove that, Cross said. Her motivations are speculation. But the letters aren't speculation. The pattern isn't speculation. Maggie moved to the desk, pointed at the documents. This is documentation, written evidence that concerns were raised and ignored. If we bring this to the ethics committee that ignored Thomas's original complaint, the composition has changed. New members, new leadership. Maggie paused. And this time, we have something Thomas didn't have. What? A living witness. A patient who survived long enough to prove that the system failed. She looked at Elena. Your father can't speak yet, but his existence speaks for him. Cross was quiet for a long time.
The weight of the decision pressed down on him. He could feel the years of careful career building trembling beneath his feet. The promotions he had worked for, the reputation he had built, the comfortable certainty that he was one of the good ones, a doctor who followed protocols, who made defensible decisions, who didn't rock boats. And now he was being asked to capsize everything. If we do this, he said slowly, there's no going back. Ashford will fight. The administration will close ranks. We'll be the troublemakers, the malcontents, the ones who couldn't let a difficult case go. I know, Maggie said. We might not win. The system is very good at protecting itself. I know that too. Cross looked at Elena, at the letters spread across his desk, at the evidence of a man who had tried to do the right thing and been crushed for it. Your father, he said quietly. He knew the cost. He tried anyway. Elena nodded. Her eyes were bright with tears. That's who he was.
Before my mother died, before he closed himself off, he was the kind of man who couldn't look away from something wrong. Cross thought about Michael Torres, about the guilt he had carried for 3 years, about the promise he had made to himself. Never hesitate, never doubt, never let uncertainty become delay. But maybe that promise had been wrong. Maybe certainty was just another way of looking away. Okay, he said, let's do this. The ethics committee meeting was scheduled for Friday, 3 days away. 3 days to prepare. 3 days for the hospital to realize what was coming and try to stop it. Maggie spent those 3 days expecting the worst, waiting for the summons to HR, the termination letter, the security escort to the parking lot. Every time her phone buzzed, every time a supervisor walked past her station, she braced for impact. But the impact didn't come. Either Bashford didn't know what they were planning, or she had decided to wait to see how serious they were.
To calculate her response. Cross was more visible about his preparations.
He met with 2 members of the ethics committee privately, doctors he trusted, ones who had raised their own concerns about protocol over the years. He shared the pattern data, the letters, the timeline of Thomas Brennan's case. Their reactions were cautious but interested, the kind of careful engagement that happened when people recognized something wrong but weren't sure if they wanted to fight about it. "We need more," Cross told Maggie on Thursday night. "The committee will want something definitive, something that proves this wasn't just one mistake." "What about the test results, Thomas's brain activity?" "That proves he was misdiagnosed. It doesn't prove the system failed. They'll argue it was an anomaly, a rare case that slipped through." Maggie thought about the other cases in her spreadsheet. The 17 patients accelerated before board reviews, the 12 reclassified observations.
What about Patterson? She said suddenly. The nurse who noted the pupillary response? She documented what she saw, and then it was reclassified by Ashford personally. If Patterson is willing to testify that she was pressured to accept the reclassification, that's hearsay. She'd have to be willing to go on record. Then let's ask her. Patterson was scared. Maggie found her in the break room during the night shift, the same break room where Jenny had given her the USB drive, where so many quiet conversations had happened in the margins of the hospital's official business. I can't, Patterson said, her voice barely above a whisper. I have student loans, I have rent. I can't afford to lose this job. I understand, Maggie said. I'm not asking you to risk everything. I'm just asking what happened. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Her coffee grew cold in her hands. I saw the response, she said finally. The pupillary contraction. It was real. I documented it because that's what we're supposed to do. Document everything. Let the doctors interpret. And then Dr. Ashford called me into her office. She was very calm, very professional. She explained that my observation was probably an artifact, a common misreading that inexperienced nurses sometimes made. She said she was reclassifying it for my own protection, so it wouldn't look like I had made an error. Patterson's hands tightened around the cup. But it wasn't an error. I know what I saw, and she knew I knew. But she made it very clear that pursuing it would be unwise. Did she threaten you? She didn't have to. The implication was enough. Patterson looked up, her eyes wet. I have 2 more years on my loan payments. I couldn't afford to be the nurse who questioned a director, so I let it go. Maggie nodded slowly. She understood. She had made the same choice once, the choice to stay quiet, to protect herself, to trust the system even when she knew the system was wrong. What if you weren't alone? She asked. What if there were other people willing to speak up? What if the risk was shared? Patterson studied her for a long moment. Is that what's happening? People are actually going to fight this? Dr. Cross submitted a formal complaint. The ethics committee is meeting Friday. We have documentation, patterns, letters, evidence that goes back 10 years. And do you think it will matter? Maggie thought about David, about the internal review that had changed nothing, about all the times the system had protected itself. I don't know, she said honestly, but I think it's worth trying. I think it's the only thing worth trying. Patterson was quiet for a long time. The break room hummed with the refrigerator, the distant beeping of monitors, the soft sounds of a hospital that never stopped moving. Okay, she said finally. I'll make a statement, but I wanted in writing that I'm not acting alone. I wanted documented that Dr. Cross and others are part of this. Done. Patterson nodded, set down her coffee. For the first time since Maggie had sat down, she almost smiled. You know what's funny? She said. I became a nurse because I wanted to help people, and somewhere along the way, I forgot that helping people sometimes means making trouble. Maggie reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Welcome to trouble, she said. The ethics committee convened at 2 p.m. on Friday. 7 members, 3 physicians, 2 administrators, a patient advocate, a community representative. They sat around an oval table in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and important decisions. Cross presented the case. He started with Thomas Brennan, the misdiagnosis, the rushed timeline, the reclassified observation. He explained the test results, the brain activity, the fact that a man who had been scheduled for termination was now showing signs of consciousness. Then he went broader. The pattern data, the 17 accelerated cases, the 12 reclassified observations, the 8 skipped confirmatory tests. He laid out the numbers calmly, clinically, letting the statistics speak for themselves. And then he introduced letters. Thomas Brennan's letters from 2014, the documentation of concerns raised and ignored, the meeting with Ashford that had preceded his removal from the volunteer program. The room was very quiet when he finished. The committee chair, Dr. Harrison, a cardiologist in his 60s, leaned forward. "This is a serious allegation, Dr. Cross. You're suggesting that end-of-life decisions in this hospital have been influenced by administrative pressure rather than medical judgment." "I'm suggesting that the pattern warrants investigation," Cross said carefully.
I'm not accusing any individual. I'm asking for systemic review. And the letters from Mr. Brennan, these are 10 years old. The administration at that time. Dr. Ashford was involved in the original complaint, Cross said, and Dr. Ashford personally reclassified the observation that delayed Mr. Brennan's correct diagnosis. The room shifted. Eyes flickered toward Ashford, who sat at the far end of the table, her face unreadable. "Dr. Ashford," Harrison said, "do you have a response?" Ashford's voice was calm, measured, the voice of someone who had prepared for this moment. "I have served this hospital for 15 years, she said. In that time, I have made thousands of decisions about patient care, difficult decisions, decisions that required balancing limited resources against infinite needs. Some of those decisions, in retrospect, might have been different. That's the nature of medicine." She paused. Dr. Cross is presenting correlation as causation.
Yes, some cases were resolved before board reviews. That's because we prioritize clearing our caseload before administrative periods. It's basic workflow management. Yes, some observations were reclassified. That's because medical interpretation is subjective, and experienced physicians sometimes disagree with initial assessments. Her eyes swept the room. As for Mr. Brennan's letters, I remember them. I remember him. He was a passionate man who cared deeply about patient care, but his concerns were addressed through proper channels at the time. The fact that he was dissatisfied with the outcome does not make the process illegitimate. "And his current case?" Harrison asked. "The rush timeline? The misdiagnosis?" Ashford's expression didn't change. "A regrettable error, one that we caught and corrected. The system worked." "The system almost killed a conscious man," Cross said quietly. "The system saved a conscious man," Ashford countered. "Because protocols allowed for reassessment when new information emerged. That's what protocols are for." The room fell silent. Harrison looked at the faces around the table. The weight of the decision hung in the air like smoke. "This committee will take the matter under advisement," he said finally. "We will review the documentation provided and issue findings within 30 days. 30 days. An eternity in hospital time. Long enough for memories to fade, for narratives to shift, for the system to reorganize itself around the inconvenience." Cross gathered his materials. Maggie, watching from the back of the room, felt the familiar weight of disappointment settling into her chest. They had tried, they had spoken up, and now they would wait. The 30 days passed slowly. On the surface, nothing changed. The hospital kept running. Patients came and went. Machines beeped and ventilators hissed, and the endless business of keeping people alive continued without interruption. But underneath, everything was different. Maggie felt it in the way conversations stopped when she walked into rooms, in the careful distance her colleagues maintained, in the too polite smiles from supervisors who had never noticed her before. She was marked now, not officially, not in any way that could be documented or challenged, but everyone knew she was the nurse who had asked questions, the troublemaker, the one who couldn't leave well enough alone. Cross felt it too.
His surgical schedule was quietly reduced. His input on complex cases was no longer requested. At staff meetings, Ashford addressed him with a formal politeness that felt like a blade wrapped in silk. They were being frozen out, slowly, professionally, the institutional equivalent of a cold shoulder that could last forever. Elena stayed. She had extended her leave from work, rented a small apartment near the hospital.
Visited her father every day, sometimes for hours at a time, talking to him about everything and nothing. Thomas was improving, slowly, incrementally, in ways that only the most attentive observer would notice. His eyes opened more frequently now. His hand movements seemed more purposeful. The physical therapists were cautiously optimistic, but he still couldn't speak, still couldn't communicate in any reliable way, still trapped in the space between presence and expression. Elena learned to read the small signs, the way his breathing changed when she talked about her mother, the slight tension in his fingers when she mentioned the hospital, the flicker in his eyes when she asked if he was okay. He was in there. She knew it now, and she wasn't going to abandon him again. On day 23, Maggie received a call from Dr. Harrison. "The committee has completed its preliminary review," he said. His voice was careful, neutral. "We'd like to meet with you privately before issuing our findings."
Maggie's heart pounded. What kind of findings? I'd rather discuss this in person. Can you come to my office this afternoon? She could. She did. Harrison's office was cluttered with the accumulated debris of a long career: medical journals, family photographs, awards from professional societies. The man himself looked tired, older than his 63 years, weighed down by something he couldn't name. "Please sit," he said. Maggie sat. "The committee has reviewed all the documentation," Harrison began. Dr. Cross's data, the letters from Mr. Brennan, Nurse Patterson's statement, the timeline of events. He paused. "We found concerning patterns, not conclusive evidence of wrongdoing, but enough to warrant systemic review. We're recommending changes to end-of-life protocols, mandatory secondary assessments, extended observation periods for ambiguous cases, stricter documentation requirements." Maggie felt something loosen in her chest. That's good." "It is."
Harrison hesitated. "But there's something else." The loosening stopped. "The committee also found insufficient evidence to support disciplinary action against any individual. Dr. Ashford's decisions, while perhaps aggressive, were within acceptable medical standards. The reclassification of Nurse Patterson's observation was a judgment call, not a protocol violation." "So nothing happens to her?" "Systemic change happens, that's not nothing. And the patients who died? The ones who might have been misdiagnosed like Thomas Brennan?" Harrison was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy. "We can't undo the past, Ms. Reyes. We can only try to build a better future. That's the best medicine can offer." Maggie thought about David, about the internal review that had found nothing wrong, about all the ways systems protected themselves while claiming to serve justice. "That's not enough," she said quietly. "I know," Harrison met her eyes, "but it's what we have."
That night, Ashford found Maggie in the parking garage. It was late, past 10 p.m., the end of a double shift. Maggie was walking to her car, keys in hand, mind churning through the committee's decision. Ashford stepped out from between two parked vehicles, not threatening, not aggressive, just present. "Ms. Reyes," she said. "A moment?" Maggie stopped, her hand tightened around her keys. "The committee made their decision," Ashford continued. "Protocol changes, systemic review. You got what you wanted." "Did I?" "More than most people get when they challenge this institution." Ashford's voice was calm, almost conversational. "You should be satisfied." "I'm not." "No, I didn't think you would be." Ashford moved closer, her heels clicking on the concrete. "You want accountability, someone to blame, a villain to punish." "I want the truth." "The truth," Ashford smiled, a thin, tired smile. "The truth is that I have spent 15 years making impossible decisions.
Every day, I decide who gets resources and who doesn't, who gets the bed, the machine, the surgeon's time. And sometimes that means accepting that not everyone can be saved. Thomas Brennan could have been saved, was being saved, and you were going to let him die. I was going to let a patient with a confirmed terminal diagnosis transition peacefully, according to his family's wishes and established medical protocols. Ashford's voice hardened slightly. That's not murder, Miss Reyes. That's medicine. And the letters? His complaints from 10 years ago? Ashford was quiet for a moment. Something flickered across her face. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated. Thomas Brennan was a good man, she said finally. He cared deeply about patients. But he didn't understand how hospitals work. He saw individual cases and wanted individual justice. He couldn't see the system, the thousands of decisions that have to be made, the trade-offs that can't be avoided.
So you silenced him. I disagreed with him, professionally, through proper channels. His concerns were reviewed and found to be without merit. She paused. The fact that he chose to take it personally was unfortunate. Maggie stared at her, tried to see the villain, the monster, the cold-hearted administrator who had sacrificed patients for efficiency. But all she saw was a tired woman, a doctor who had made hard choices for so long that she had forgotten there might be other ways. "You're not sorry," Maggie said. "Not really." Ashford considered the question. "I'm sorry that good intentions sometimes cause pain. I'm sorry that the system isn't perfect. But I'm not sorry for the decisions I've made, because someone had to make them. And if not me, then someone else. Someone who might have been less careful, less thoughtful, less committed to doing the best possible job with impossible constraints." She turned to walk away, then paused. "You have a choice now, Miss Reyes. The committee has spoken. Changes will be made. You can accept that and move on. Keep your job, rebuild your career, find satisfaction in the small victory you've won. And if I don't, then you'll keep fighting, keep asking questions, keep looking for the justice that medicine can't provide." Ashford's voice was almost gentle. "And eventually, the institution will push back. Not because you're wrong, but because systems survive by absorbing threats. It's nothing personal, it's just how power works." She walked away into the darkness, her footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. Maggie stood alone in the parking garage, keys still clutched in her hand, feeling the weight of the choice she had to make. Accept the compromise, take the partial victory, let the system adjust and continue. Or keep fighting, risk everything, pursue a justice that might never come. She thought about David, about the silence that had killed him. She thought about Thomas Brennan, about the letters he had written, about the 10 years he had spent waiting for someone to listen. She thought about all the patients she would never know, the ones who might have been saved, the ones who might have been lost, the ones whose stories would never be told because the records had been sanitized and the memories had faded. And she made her decision. Maddie didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table until dawn, surrounded by papers, printouts of the pattern data, copies of Thomas's letters, her own handwritten notes from weeks of investigation. The coffee in her cup went cold, then colder, forgotten. She thought about Ashford's words in the parking garage. Systems survive by absorbing threats. It was true. She had seen it happen before. The hospital would implement the new protocols, issue the right statements, make the appropriate adjustments. And in 6 months, a year, the urgency would fade. The old pressures would reassert themselves. The metrics would matter again. Nothing would really change, unless someone made sure it did. Maggie looked at the photograph of David on the shelf across the room. 7 years since he had died. 7 years of silence. 7 years of watching and waiting and hoping that someone else would fight the battles she was too afraid to fight. No more waiting. She opened her laptop and began to write. The document took 3 days to complete. It wasn't a legal brief or a formal complaint. It was something simpler,
A narrative, a story told in facts and dates and names. The story of how a hospital had learned to prioritize efficiency over humanity, and how that priority had nearly killed a man who had given the institution his life's work. She started with Thomas Brennan, his history with the hospital, the plaques that bore his name, the volunteer work that had consumed his grief after Ruth's death, the letters he had written in 2014, trying to sound an alarm that no one wanted to hear.
She documented the pattern, the 17 accelerated cases, the 12 reclassified observations, the 8 skipped confirmatory tests. She named no villains, made no accusations. She simply laid out the facts and let them speak for themselves. She included Patterson's statement, Cross's data analysis, the timeline of Thomas's case, from admission to misdiagnosis to the moment when a bureaucratic error had saved his life. And she ended with a question: how many others weren't so lucky? On the 4th day, she sent the document to 3 places. First, to the hospital's ethics committee, not as a complaint, but as a supplement to their findings, a reminder that systemic change meant nothing without systemic accountability. Second, to the state medical board, a formal request for external review of end-of-life protocols at St. Catherine's Hospital, not an accusation, an invitation to look closer. Third, to a journalist. This was the part that scared her most, going outside the system.
Breaking the unwritten rule that said hospitals handled their own problems, that dirty laundry stayed hidden, that loyalty to the institution mattered more than loyalty to the truth. The journalist was someone Jenny had known from college, a healthcare reporter at the regional newspaper, someone who had written about hospital administration and patient advocacy, someone who understood that the best stories weren't about villains and heroes, but about systems and the people caught inside them. Maggie didn't ask for an exposé. She didn't demand headlines. She simply shared the document and said, "This is what happened. This is what I found. Do with it what you think is right." The response came faster than she expected. The ethics committee acknowledged receipt of her supplemental documentation, thanked her for her thoroughness, promised to incorporate her findings into their ongoing review. The state medical board opened a preliminary inquiry. Routine, they said.
Standard procedure when concerns were raised about protocol compliance. Nothing to worry about. The journalist called her on a Tuesday evening. "This is significant," she said. Her name was Rachel Chen, and her voice carried the careful excitement of someone who recognized a story worth telling. "The pattern you've documented, if it holds up, it's not just one hospital. It's a systemic issue. Efficiency metrics driving clinical decisions. It's happening everywhere." "I know," Maggie said. "I want to write about it, not just Thomas Brennan, the bigger picture, how hospitals are pressured to move patients through faster, and what that means for end-of-life care." Rachel paused. "But I need you on the record. I need someone willing to put their name on this." Maggie thought about her career. 28 years at St. Catherine's, the pension she had been building, the colleagues who had already started avoiding her. She thought about David. "I'll go on the record," she said.
The story ran 3 weeks later. It wasn't front-page news, healthcare policy rarely was, but it was thorough, well-researched, and impossible to ignore. Rachel had done her homework, interviewing former patients' families, other nurses who had seen similar patterns, build the hospital, tried to reform it, been pushed out, and nearly died in its care. A story of institutional failure and individual courage. A story that asked uncomfortable questions without providing easy answers. The hospital's official response was predictable. They expressed concern for patient welfare, highlighted the protocol changes already underway, emphasized their commitment to the highest standards of care. But the damage was done. Within a week, 2 other hospitals in the region announced reviews of their own end-of-life protocols.
A state senator called for legislative hearings on healthcare efficiency metrics. Patient advocacy groups began organizing, demanding greater transparency and oversight. The system was absorbing the threat, just as Ashford had predicted. But this time, the threat was too big to absorb quietly.
Maggie received her termination notice on a Friday afternoon. The official reason was workforce restructuring, the same bloodless language that hospitals used when they wanted to remove someone without admitting why. Her position was being eliminated. Her services were no longer required. She would receive a modest severance package and a letter of recommendation that said nothing and meant less. She cleaned out her locker alone after hours when the hallways were empty and the fluorescent lights buzzed their lonely song. 28 years of her life reduced to a cardboard box of personal items, photographs, a coffee mug with a chipped handle, the small jade plant she had kept on her desk since David died. Jenny found her in the parking garage, loading the box into her car. "I heard," Jenny said. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be." Maggie closed the trunk. "I knew this was coming. I made my choice." "What will you do now?" Maggie looked back at the hospital, the building where she had spent half her life, where she had learned to be invisible, where she had finally learned to speak. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'll figure it out." Jenny hugged her, held on for a long moment. "You did the right thing," Jenny whispered. "You know that, right? Even if it doesn't feel like it, you did the right thing." Maggie nodded. She wasn't sure she believed it yet, but she hoped she would, someday. Elena was waiting for her at Thomas's bedside. Maggie hadn't planned to visit, hadn't been sure she would be welcome now that she was officially separated from the hospital. But Elena had texted her that morning, "Come see him. He's been asking for you." Asking was too strong a word. Thomas still couldn't speak. The damage to his motor functions would take months of therapy to address, if it could be addressed at all. But he had learned to communicate in small ways, blinking patterns, hand squeezes, the laborious process of pointing at letters on a board. When Maggie entered the room, Thomas's eyes found her immediately. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, gratitude, things that words couldn't capture. Elena stood. "I'll give you a minute." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Maggie sat in the chair beside the bed, looked at the man who had started all of this, the carpenter, the volunteer, the witness who had tried to speak and been silenced. "I read your letters," she said, "from 2014. All of them." Thomas blinked. "Once for yes. You tried to fix this 10 years ago, and they shut you down." Another blink. "I'm sorry," her voice cracked. "I'm sorry no one listened. I'm sorry you had to wait so long for someone to see what you saw." Thomas's hand moved, slowly, painfully, reaching toward her. She took it, felt the weakness in his grip, the tremor of muscles relearning their purpose. He squeezed, once, twice. "Thank you." Maggie squeezed back, felt the tears she had been holding for weeks finally break free. "I did it for you," she whispered, "and for David, and for all the people who deserved better than what the system gave them." Thomas's eyes were bright, wet, the eyes of a man who had been lost in darkness and finally found his way back to light. She sat with him until the sun went down, holding his hand, saying nothing. Some things didn't need words. 6 months later, the rehabilitation center was smaller than St.
Catherine's, quieter, tucked into a hillside overlooking a valley that turned gold in autumn. Thomas Brennan had been transferred here 3 months ago, after his condition stabilized enough for intensive therapy. He was learning to walk again, to speak again, to inhabit a body that had been silent for so long. Progress was slow. Some days he could manage a few words, broken, effortful, but real. Other days the words wouldn't come at all, and he communicated through the letterboard, through gestures, through the eloquent silence of a man who had learned that presence mattered more than speech. Elena visited every weekend. The drive was 4 hours each way, but she made it without complaint. Sometimes she brought Sophie, her daughter, Thomas's granddaughter, a bright-eyed girl of 7 who didn't understand why Grandpa couldn't talk like other grandpas, but who loved him anyway, fiercely and completely. Thomas lived for those visits.
You could see it in his eyes when they walked through the door, the way the light came back, the way his whole body seemed to lift toward them. He was still learning to be a father, still learning to bridge the decades of silence between him and Elena, but they were trying. Not fired. He had been careful enough, connected enough to avoid that fate. But the writing was on the wall. His surgical schedule had dwindled to almost nothing. His recommendations were ignored. His presence at staff meetings was tolerated but not welcomed. So he left, found a position at a smaller hospital in another city. Less prestige, less pay, but more freedom. He was building new protocols there, implementing the changes that St. Catherine's had promised but never fully delivered, starting over. It wasn't the career he had imagined, but it was the career he could live with.
Some nights, he still thought about Michael Torres, the patient he had lost by hesitating, the guilt that had driven him to value speed over caution. But he thought about Thomas Brennan, too, the patient he had almost lost by not hesitating enough. Maybe wisdom was learning to hold both truths at once. Maybe good medicine meant knowing when to act and when to wait, when to trust the system and when to question it. He was still learning. He hoped he always would be. Dr. Victoria Ashford remained at St. Catherine's. The ethics committee had cleared her of wrongdoing. The state medical board's inquiry had found areas for improvement, but no actionable violations. The newspaper story had damaged her reputation, but not destroyed it. She was still the ICU director, still making the hard decisions, still balancing impossible equations of resources and needs, lives and logistics. But something had changed. The new protocols were in place now. Mandatory secondary assessments, extended observation periods, stricter documentation requirements. They slowed things down, created bottlenecks, made the efficiency metrics harder to hit. Ashford implemented them anyway, not because she believed she had been wrong. She still maintained that her decisions had been defensible, that the system had worked as designed, but because the institution demanded it, because the board demanded it, because the threat had been too visible to absorb without visible change. And sometimes, late at night, when the ICU was quiet and the machines beeped their steady rhythms, she found herself pausing before decisions, asking one more question, running one more test. Not because she doubted herself, but because doubt, she had learned, was not always weakness. Sometimes doubt was the only thing that kept you honest. Maggie Reyes found a new job. It was at a small clinic on the other side of the city, a community health center that served people without insurance, without connections, without the resources to navigate the labyrinth of modern healthcare. The pay was less, the hours were longer, the work was harder in ways she hadn't anticipated. But she loved it. Here she wasn't invisible. Here she was essential, the experienced nurse who knew how to calm a frightened patient, how to spot a problem before it became a crisis, how to make people feel seen in a system designed to process them like products. She still thought about St. Catherine's, still followed the news about protocol changes and policy reviews, still wondered if the changes would stick, or if the old pressures would eventually reassert themselves. But she had made her peace with uncertainty. She had done what she could. The rest was beyond her control. On a Saturday afternoon in October, Maggie drove to the rehabilitation center.
Elena had invited her, a small gathering to celebrate Thomas's progress. He had spoken his first complete sentence the week before. "Tell Sophie I love her." 5 words that had taken 10 minutes to produce, each syllable a triumph of will over damaged neurons. The room was warm when Maggie arrived. Elena was there, and Sophie, and a few of the therapists who had worked with Thomas over the months. Someone had brought a cake. Someone else had hung a banner that said "Welcome back" in crooked letters. Thomas sat in a wheelchair by the window, the autumn light falling across his face. He looked older than he had 6 months ago, thinner, more fragile, but his eyes were clear, present, alive.
When he saw Maggie, something shifted in his expression. He raised his hand, slowly, with effort, and gestured for her to come closer. She knelt beside his chair, took his hand. "Thank you," he said. The words were slurred, difficult, but unmistakable. "For seeing."
Maggie felt the tears come again. She didn't try to stop them. "You're welcome," she whispered. "Thank you for holding on." Thomas smiled, a real smile, the first one she had ever seen on his face. The smile of a man who had been given something he never expected, a second chance. Later, after the cake was eaten and the visitors had gone, Elena found Maggie in the hallway. "He has something for you," she said. "He's been working on it for weeks. Wouldn't let me help." She handed Maggie an envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in shaky handwriting, letters formed with enormous effort, each one a small victory. Maggie read the words slowly, felt them sink into her heart. Dear Maggie, I spent 10 years in silence, waiting, hoping, believing that someday someone would see what I saw, would care enough to look. You looked. You saw me when I couldn't speak. You fought for me when I couldn't fight.
You gave me back my voice, not just the words, but the belief that words still matter. I don't know how to thank you for that. I don't know if there are enough words in any language. But I want you to know what you did mattered, not just to me, to everyone who comes after, every patient who gets the extra test, every family who gets more time to say goodbye, every nurse who learns that speaking up is worth the cost. You changed things. Maybe not everything, maybe not forever, but enough. For now, that's all any of us can do. Thank you for seeing me. Thomas. Maggie folded the letter carefully, pressed it against her chest. She thought about David, about the silence that had killed him, about the 7 years she had spent carrying that weight. The weight was still there. It would always be there, but it felt different now. Lighter, shared. She had done what she couldn't do for David. She had spoken up. She had fought. She had made someone see. And someone had seen her back.
The sun was setting when Maggie left the rehabilitation center. She stood in the parking lot for a moment, watching the light fade over the hills, the sky turning gold and pink and purple. The air smelled like autumn, dry leaves and distant fires, the scent of things ending and beginning. She thought about all the things she couldn't change, the patients who had died, the families who had never known, the system that would keep grinding forward, absorbing threats, protecting itself. But she also thought about Thomas, about Elena and Sophie, about Cross building new protocols at his new hospital, about Patterson, who had finally found the courage to speak, about all the small changes that might add up to something larger someday. The world wasn't fixed. It never would be. But it was a little better than it had been, and that was enough. For now. 1 year later, Maggie received a letter in the mail. No return address.
Just her name, written in careful handwriting that she recognized immediately. Inside was a photograph. Thomas Brennan, standing upright, leaning on a cane but standing. Elena on one side, Sophie on the other. All three of them smiling. On the back, 2 words in Thomas's shaky hand. You saw me. Maggie put the photograph on her shelf, next to the picture of David. 2 men, 2 stories, 2 reminders of why she had become a nurse in the first place. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she picked up her keys and went to work. There were patients waiting, patients who needed someone to see them.
and Maggie Reyes had learned, finally, how to look. The end. If this story made you stop for a moment, if it reminded you that sometimes the quietest people see the most, then stay here with us. Subscribe to the channel, not for the algorithm, but so these stories keep being told. Leave a like if you believe attention can save lives.
And if you've ever felt invisible, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. You are seen here.